At this point, al-Raghib al-Isfahani, he poses a question. Is there any praise to the idea, or is there any merit to the idea of faking it till we make it? Because this is a common doubt, especially in our time, that people have. They say, well, I know on the inside I'm not a good person, and I want to live authentically. I don't want to practice above my level of my internal belief, right? I'm going to wait until I'm ready, or I'm going to wait until I've truly believe it, and then I'm going to do it, right? As opposed to the opposite sort of way of thinking is that, okay, I'm going to fake it until I make it. I'm going to put on the external whatever, and then I hope that my internal self comes along for the ride and actually develops. And so, 1,000 years ago, al-Raghib al-Isfahani actually takes this on, and it's very, very relevant to today. He says that it's neither necessarily good or bad. It depends upon your intention. There's a way that this can happen that's good, and then there's a way that can happen that this is bad. The way that it is potentially praiseworthy and good is that somebody is using the external kind of trappings in order to train their inner self. We would compare it to maybe a scaffolding, right? Let's take the prayer, okay? By the logic of I shouldn't practice a certain degree until I feel motivated or driven to do it from the inside, then we would be just like the Christians and only pray when we're ready and we feel like it. And how often would that really be, right? I want everybody to think, if they've ever thought themselves like, well, I'm only going to pray when I feel the love of Allah to pray or motivated to pray. How often would you really pray? You would, oh my God, it would like once a week, once a month, a couple times a month. That's just the honest reality. So Allah said no. Allah said no. You're going to pray whether you feel motivated or not. And the person who prays feeling love and motivation, that's a better prayer than the person who doesn't, but you're going to pray anyway. Why? Because we're assuming and we're hoping that the outer shell, that the outer scaffolding is going to become building the capacity for the inner self to develop, right? Like one of the famous scholars of old said, I struggled to pray night prayers for 20 years. And then the following 20 years, I actually enjoyed it, right? And it's like, if he just operated on the logic of, well, I don't feel motivated and I'm not going to do it until I'm motivated or overflowing with the love of Allah, that's when I'm going to start praying night prayers, he would have never started in the first place, right? Some things, sometimes you need to just throw yourself into it and then wait for your inner self to come along for the ride. However, al-Raghib al-Isfahani is sensitive enough to realize that there are certain situations where that doesn't work and this thing can actually backfire. And so he mentions one situation where this is sort of blameworthy is when that doing that outer work is giving you some sort of benefit or some sort of praise, right? And that develops hypocrisy, right? So if you're putting on, let's say you're not a scholar, okay, but you're going to dress like the scholars. I come out here with my, crisp white thobe and my turban and the big flowing, I got my entourage and stuff like that. Okay, I dress up for Jummah because that's about the station of Jummah and respect out of Jummah. But if I'm going to dress like, the grand sheikh of this institution or that institution, isn't it true that it's going to change the way that people treat me? Okay, so now I have a conflict of interest. So now it might not be necessarily that I'm trying to inhabit within myself, develop that internal capacity to reach up to the level that my external self has kind of put on. It might actually be the opposite, where I have this sort of hypocrisy going. My internal self is actually going down because now I'm doing it for bad reasons and bad motivations and bad intentions. I'm doing it to show off. I'm doing it to accrue some sort of benefit. I'm doing it to be treated or praised in a certain way. That's riyah, right? That's the definition of what the Prophet ﷺ said, was this sort of showing off towards other people. So that's bad. So we need to be careful. Like, there are situations, there's a time for this and a time for that. There are times, there are two different tools in the tool belt, right? There are times when you need to just shut up and force yourself to do it, right? And not worry about how you're feeling on the inside. Because if you keep on working at it, eventually you're going to get to the point where it's going to become natural and you might even start to love it. And then you will have developed yourself on the inside. And there's other situations where maybe going ahead of where your internal self is at might be a recipe for disaster, either because you're going to start showing off, or maybe you're going to develop some sort of type of resentment against the thing that you're doing. So two different tools in the toolbox to be used in two different situations. And al-Raghib al-Isfahani says to take account of yourself and your internal self and to try to figure out which one is going on.